Okay, so the first thing I want to do is show you guys the lecture materials for today. And okay, so you guys should all be able to see the PowerPoint presentation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And so Ben, I'm gonna put you in charge of the chat because I can't keep all the windows open. So if you see something that's important, somebody has a question or whatever in the chat, please let me know, okay? Ben, you good? Because I'm gonna close the chat now. Are you there? Ben? Ben Rose?
I could do it.
Yeah, okay, thanks. All right. So the first thing I want to show you, so this is the chapter on competition from your textbook. And obviously this is the material that we're going over. It's a really nice quick summary for a lot of the information that we'll be talking about over the course of the next couple of weeks while we finish up this semester. And that is, we're going to be talking about these different types of industry structure. We're going to talk about monopoly, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and then perfect competition, which is our initial chapters that talk about competition. The thing to remember, and might hopefully we'll have a chance to get to it in today's lecture, but if we don't, just to bear in mind, is that there are two different issues in competition. Well, maybe three, but one of them is what's going on at the firm level, and the other one, what's going on at the industry level. Okay, you can have a competitive industry, and then one business within that industry is a competitive firm. And they're related to one another, but obviously they're not exactly the same, right? One's at an individual level and one's at a market level. And so you have to keep track of whether or not you're talking about the individual firms, behavior within the competitive industry, or you're talking about the behavior of the industry as a whole. If you don't keep those two separate, then it'll be difficult to understand what's going on. And then the third thing, which actually has two things going on also, is the long run and the short run. And we've talked about this a little bit already in the context of cost curves. And you guys read the cost curve chapters, and we've talked about that a bit. But the main idea is that in the short run, the firm and the industry are fixed with respect to their scale of operation. And what that means at the industry level is that if there are 10 firms in the industry, you're stuck with 10 firms in the short run. In the long run, new firms can enter or some firms can exit from the industry. So you can have the number of firms operating in the industry over the long run change. Okay. And for the business, in the short run, the business, and we've talked about this already, but is fixed with respect to their production capacity. They have a certain size of a factory, for example, and they're stuck with that factory size in the short run. In the long run, however, they can plan and they could expand their scale of operation. They could build a bigger factory, or they could shrink. So if you're talking about expanding or shrinking with respect to capacity, that's a long run decision of the firm, a long run behavior. The only thing that the firm does in the short run is decide whether to produce more or less of its given capacity. So if it has the capacity to produce 1,000 units, it might produce 100, under some set of circumstances, and another set of circumstances it might produce 50. But it's not changing its capacity, it's just changing how much to produce within that capacity. Anyway, hopefully that helps orient you. And there are a couple of big picture things that we'll talk about, but the main thing is that the firm is trying to maximize profit. I wanted to go through this chapter really quickly to highlight a few of the key graphs. And so, like, if I was doing Ignithium and the homework problems, and I didn't know what to do, what I would do is I would have one browser window open with either the lecture or the textbook to these key graphs. And this is one of them right here. Okay, it identifies economic profit, which is one of the things that you're going to have to do. It identifies the cost curves of the firm and the demand, which we're going to go over. But this is the perfect competition in the short run. So a lot of the questions on Ignithium are going to ask you like about features of this graph, but the graph's going to be on Ignithium. And you should see, again, we were going to save a little bit of time later on, but if we do this and I look at this graph and then I look at the graphs on Ignithium, then I'm going to see that they line up, that they look similar to one another. Here's another key graph, but the first one, this is the big one. This is perfect competition in the long run. So that's what I wanted to show you guys from your chapters, is those two graphs and basically what we're doing now. So let's go back to our PowerPoint, and we'll start at the beginning, but we'll go through these things kind of quickly because we don't have tons of time to spend on it. So we're going to talk about a competitive market and the characteristics. So there are lots of buyers and sellers, and they're offering goods that are substitutes for one another. They're largely similar. Now, the last one, this controls what's going on in the long run, and that is that firms can freely enter and exit the market. So what does this really mean? What are we talking about? Well, most of the time, perfect competition is an ideal, and no markets are truly perfectly competitive. But there are some that look a lot more competitive than others. So the ones that look the most competitive are agricultural markets. So markets for wheat and soybeans, pork bellies, milk solids, fruits and vegetables. And the reason, if you think about it, how many people buy oranges? I just bought apples last night at the local Target. There are lots of people, right? Lots of buyers that buy apples. How many different sellers of apples are there? Well, I mean, you can imagine there are a lot, right? And the goods are largely the same. Now, I won't say, okay, Nicole, since you were chatting with me, are you there? Oh, Nicole? No? How about,
Yeah,
okay, you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are all apples pretty much substitutes for one another?
Yeah, I guess.
Oh, you don't have a favorite apple?
No, I haven't willingly touched a fruit or vegetable in like 6 months.
Is it a COVID thing or why?
I just, I don't, I
You
just don't eat them.
okay. Is there anybody here who is an apple lover that likes apples?
Yes, I am.
Emmett, you're an apple lover. So
Yes.
tell me, are all apples basically the same?
Uh, no, there's quite different apples. Like Honeycrisp apples are usually larger, crisper, sweeter.
Boom. You nailed it. So I bought apples last night, but I didn't buy apples for myself. I bought apples for my wife. And you know what? Her favorite apple is the Honey Crisp apple. You nailed it. And so if like I buy her another apple, she's, you know, I mean, she's not gonna feed it to the dog, but she's not gonna. So what's your favorite apple?
Um, Probably either like the Granny Smith or the Honeycrisp. I like the sour sort of apple.
The green
Yeah.
apple. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I used to be, my kids used to be green apple fans, but the Honey Crisp is pretty hard to beat.
Honeycrisp is pretty good.
Yeah, the red delicious, not so much, and like the Fuji apple, but they're not exactly the same, right? But within the class of Honeycrisp apples, they're all good substitutes for one another, right?
Yeah.
right? I mean, you don't look and say, oh, this has to be the Honeycrisp from this particular farmer in this particular state. It's like they're all the same breed of apple, so they're good, right? They're good substitutes. So the point here is when we say that the goods offered are largely the same, and I don't know, are there other vegetables or anything like that that you like? Are you a corn fan or you like
I mean, I try
cilantro?
to I try to keep my diet more varied than that. So I'd say I kind of eat just all sorts of stuff. But I mean,
Yeah,
it feels like everywhere I look, there's just different variants of every vegetable or fruit.
yeah. I think the main division now is like organic versus not. But as long as you do a good job of saying, uh, and like when I go to the store and I look at, to buy, I like having cilantro and onions on my tacos, right? So,
Mm.
but I don't look at who made the cilantro. I'll just take any little thing of cilantro and off, They're all substitutes for one another. So for most agricultural products, um, yeah, there are lots of sellers, and the goods people will just substitute. Mostly, the key here is it's on the basis of price. And so if you see a market where there are reasonably lots of buyers and lots of sellers, and it seems like the goods are doesn't matter which seller's selling them, which producer's producing them, people will substitute, normally on the basis of price alone, then the market's basically competitive. The other thing is this free entry and exit issue. So free entry and exit has to do with whether or not usually there's some barrier to getting into business. And the typical high cost barrier is a government restriction. And we'll talk more about that later on when we talk about monopoly, but you can think about it like a patent. If you make a new pharmaceutical and you file a patent for that pharmaceutical with the US Patent Office, then that gives you rights to be the exclusive seller for a period usually of about 17 years of that medicine. And so in pharmaceuticals, particularly ones that have patents on them, there is no free entry and exit. You can't just decide suddenly you want to get into that business and do it. But for most other types of businesses, like agricultural stuff, and you know this if you've ever done it, if you've ever had an orange tree in your backyard and sold your oranges, or you've grown corn and sold your corn, at the corner, it's pretty easy to get into that business. And then if you don't want to the next year do it, you don't have to. So free entry and exit just means that folks can get in and out of the business easily. Now, remember that that all competitive firms are trying to maximize their profits. The issue is that if the market's competitive and the products are identical, then buyers are buying just on the basis of price. And so that means that the seller is going to be a price taker. Being a price taker means that they can't do anything individually to influence the price of the product without losing all their business, right? If the going rate for a Honeycrisp apple is 50 cents an apple and I try to charge $1, people are just going to buy someone else's apples and I'm out of luck as a seller. Likewise for buyers, buyers are also price takers because it's kind of like there's so many buyers in the market. If you try to bargain with the seller, they're just going to pass and say, okay, don't buy if you don't want to buy at the price. This is what the going price is in the market. I'll just sell to somebody else. And because there are lots of buyers and lots of sellers, it's really difficult for anybody to try to negotiate a better price for themselves. And so that's really key, is that in competitive markets, the market overall, aggregate demand and supply in the market level demand and supply determine the price, and buyers and sellers just have to decide whether or not to transact at that price, whether they want to go at that price. It's not true, as you can imagine, in markets that are less competitive. So if you are um, a monopolist, if you do have a patent on some pharmaceutical, then you have a lot of influence over the price, right? And that's because buyers don't have any other option but to deal with you. So that's the key. So we talked about a lot of these things, so I'm going to kind of talk about them pretty quickly. Um, remember that total revenue is this formula of the price of the product times the quantity that the seller sells, and so total revenue is going to be proportional to output. If the price is fixed at the market price, the more you sell, the more revenue you generate. Average revenue tells us how much revenue the firm receives for the typical unit that's sold. And so average revenue is simply total revenue divided by the quantity sold. So we can do a little bit of math here, and you can see that since price is fixed, right? Total revenue is price times quantity divided by quantity, and price is fixed by the market. So the average revenue then is just going to be the price. What this means for us, and what you'll see in your textbook and other places like that, is that we can also interpret the demand curve as being the average revenue curve, because the demand curve tells us at a particular price what quantity would be sold. So um, let's see here. The other key concept that is new in this chapter, and it's going to be really the biggest idea moving forward for the rest of this class, is this one. And so I'll spend a minute talking about it. Marginal revenue. So marginal revenue is the change in total revenue from selling an additional unit of the good. And that's what these capital Greek letter delta, what they mean is change. Change in total revenue is you change the quantity. But notice, for a competitive firm, the change in the revenue, because the price is fixed at the market price, every time they sell an additional unit, they just collect whatever the going market price is. So it turns out that for competitive firms, and this is what a lot of students mess up, okay? For competitive firms, marginal revenue equals the price of the good. But what students mistakenly think is that marginal revenue is equal to price always, and that's not true. It's only true for a competitive firm. So let's take a look at this little table for a minute. And I see a lot of things coming up in chat, but you have an eye on it, right, Ben? So nobody has any deep questions or anything like that, right?
No.
Okay. So can you all see this um, graph or this table pretty well? Let me see. I'll blow it up a little bit. So these columns, basically the first two columns are the demand schedule. It tells us at each price what quantity would be sold. Now, this is a competitive firm, so the price is actually determined by the market, and the competitive firm is a small part of the market, so they can sell as much as they want up to their capacity at the current market price. And so since this is a competitive firm, we've got price times quantity gives us total revenue, and then we divide by the quantity, we get average revenue. And then you can see as we change from 1 to 2 gallons, right, our marginal revenue is the change in our total revenue. We go from 6 to 12, we've got a change of 6, which is also the market price. So this table is supposed to convince you that when we're talking about a competitive firm, that marginal revenue and average revenue are both equal to the price of the good, and can all be represented by the demand curve. Okay. So the goal of the competitive firm is to maximize its profits. And remember that profits are the difference between total revenue and total cost. So we've just been talking about total revenue at the beginning part of this lecture, but we already talked about total cost in the last lecture. So we're going to extend on that now. So if we look at this table, this is the information that we had before. Notice we still have the total revenue, and we know we're calculating that for competitive firms. So the price is going to be equal to 6 and some marginal revenue. We've dropped the average revenue column, but we have this new column, which is the total cost. And we can look at the total revenue, then subtract off the total cost and get the firm's profit for each level of output. Now remember, the firm wants to maximize profit. So pay attention to what's going on when the quantity of output is equal to 4 and 5. In both of those cases, notice that profit hits 7, which is its highest level, right? But in particular, notice as the firm is going from 4 units to 5 units, right, that its total revenue is going from 24 to 30. So its marginal revenue, the change is 6. And the marginal revenue is 6. And also the marginal cost, if you go from 4 to 5 units, going from 17 to 23 is a change in $6 of cost too. So marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost at the 5th unit, going from the 4th to the 5th unit, right? So this firm would choose to produce to maximize its profits where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, which means it would produce a total of 5 units. And notice that the change in profit then is 0. So that's what we're going to be looking for, where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost to identify the profit maximum of the firm. So let's see. Who wants to chat for a minute? Miranda, are you here?
Yeah,
Okay, how's it going?
pretty good.
Pretty good. So did you notice what I was saying, that the firm wants to maximize profits? So if you look at this 4th column, right?
Yeah.
The firm, like I said, so at 1 gallon of milk, their profit's $1, right? And at 2 units, it's $4. And at 3 units, it's 6. At 4, it's at 7. And 5, it's at 7. And then it starts to go back down to 6. You see that?
Yeah.
Do you find it kind of odd if I say the firm's trying to choose its level of output to maximize its profit, that the firm chooses to produce 5 instead of 4?
Yes, I would.
Yeah, because they're getting the same amount of profit either way, right?
Yeah.
So there are two things. So I'm glad you agree with me that that's a little bit odd, because I think it requires some explanation. Because what we're going to say is that the firm is going to produce at 5 units of output because that's where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Okay, and that's a little bit mysterious because it turns out in this example and in a lot of examples, the profit maximum is not unique. Meaning, right, 7 and 7 are both maxima, right, Miranda?
Yeah.
So, or they're both maximal with respect to profits. So what I want to tell you is that there's nothing that's actually going to prevent the firm from stopping at 4 units, right? But if you're thinking at it from a management perspective, okay, you want a rule that will always identify a profit maximum. And there's only one rule that will do that, and that is that if you look at the amount of output here, in this case it's the 5th, where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost, that will always be a profit maximum. It doesn't mean it's the only one, but this other one, if it exists, there's no rule to find it. It's not that it'll always be the unit, before marginal revenue equals marginal cost. There's just no rule to find it. So economists say, okay, there may be another profit maximum, but if there is, we're going to ignore it, and we're going to choose the one where marginal revenue equals to marginal cost. And there are 2 reasons for that. One is, if there is a unique maximum, it will always be associated with marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And the other one I already told you, which is if there is another maximum, we don't know how to find it. I mean, there's no rule. Does that make sense?
Yeah. in a way.
So yeah, so it's kind of like I don't know if there are any other rules like that that you know of in life, where well, I'll maybe this one is something that's timely that you can relate to. But do you ever anybody try to tell you like directions on how to get someplace?
Uh,
And
yeah.
yeah, yeah, and then you just like, I'm just gonna Google map it.
Yeah.
And it's not that the other person is wrong. It's just that Google Maps is gonna get you there.
Yeah.
So the rule is follow Google Maps because they'll always get you there. The other person, like maybe not. So do you have any other questions about this? I wanted to make sure
I don't.
Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on past this table then and show you this graph, because this is the graph that I was talking about. So notice that, and this is actually the demand curve, but notice it's a perfectly elastic flat demand curve. It's marked at P. So that's the firm's demand curve, okay? But a competitive firm's demand curve, which we're gonna explain later, actually looks like a horizontal line. And that's because they are a price taker. They're one part of the small market. But where the marginal cost intersects, and remember, the demand is also equal to the marginal revenue. So if you look where marginal cost intersects with marginal revenue, that quantity is going to be associated with the profit maximum for the firm. Okay, so what about that, Miranda? Does this graph make sense to you given what we saw on our table?
Yeah. It
Yeah.
does.
Okay, good. Because this is the main graph for the questions that show up on Ignithium and stuff you're going to want to know later. So profit maximization, as we said, occurs where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. We can see where they cross on the graph. And there's this general rule, and this arrow is kind of distracting because it should be a horizontal arrow, not an up or down arrow. But when marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, then the firm should increase its output if it wants to make more profit. When marginal revenue is less than marginal cost, the firm should decrease its output to make more profit. And when marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, the profit is maximized at that level of output. So this is how we kind of summarize our rule. The thing that we didn't really talk about, which is, not obvious unless you pay close attention to this table that we were looking at before, but notice we have marginal revenue, which is the price of the good, and the marginal cost, which is the cost of the firm for making that unit. So it's kind of a no-brainer, right? If you're here and you're making 0 gallons and you're thinking, should I make one? Well, if you make 1 gallon and you sell it for $6 and it only costs you $2 additional to make it, then you're going to generate $4 worth of profit. So that's the case, the first case we talked about, where marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. You're going to want to increase your output. Likewise, you look at the next row and marginal revenue is still greater than marginal cost. So you want to produce that unit too. It's going to keep adding to your profit. But if you ever get in a situation where you look at the marginal revenue and the marginal cost is greater, then if you produce that unit, you're going to generate a negative profit, and you actually want to decrease your output, go the other direction. Okay. So what about that, Miranda? Do those rules make sense to you?
Yeah, I feel like it goes along with the graph and like what the graph is saying.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it better on the table. It's a little bit harder to see on the graph because it's hard to identify the additional profit, but you can say, well, I know, for example, like at Q1, right? I can look at the marginal cost curve and say, okay, the costs are down here, but the revenue is up here. So yeah, I want to increase my output, right?
Yeah.
And then over here at Q2, the marginal cost is higher than the revenue from that marginal revenue line. So that would be like negative profit there, the distance between them. Anyway, that's the gist of it. The last thing that I want to say today before we stop and we talk about other things is this gives us a new idea of more precisely defining what the firm supply curve is. Sort of like my promise to you was that, we wanted to look behind supply and see what affects the firm's supply decisions. So now we know that the marginal cost curve is going to actually define how much the firm that's competitive wants to produce. So if we go back up here, we say, oh, the marginal revenue is defining what the prices the firm faces in a competitive market. And the firm's always going to use its marginal cost curve to determine what its profit maximizing level of output should be. So if the price increases, the firm's just going to follow along its marginal cost curve. And its marginal cost curve is actually going to be its supply curve. Okay. Now, there's one other thing that's a little bit deceiving here. And we're going to finish that up in the next section of explanation, but just to kind of prep you going forward, it actually turns out that the marginal cost curve is only the firm's supply curve for that portion of the marginal cost curve that's above the minimum of the average variable cost. It looks here like they're just pointing to the point where it's the minimum of the average total cost curve, because remember, the marginal cost curve crosses the average variable cost curve and the average total cost curve at their respective minimum points. But it turns out that if price drops below the minimum of average variable costs, that it's more profitable for the firm to shut down. So the firm's supply curve is only that portion of the marginal cost curve that is above the minimum of average variable cost. So this is the graph that shows that. So the thing that we haven't done yet, and which we'll do shortly, either in your reading or some other lecture that I send out to you, is explain why it is the firm would choose to shut down if price drops below its average variable cost. So we have to explain this thing called the short run shutdown rule. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording this.